The silence in the house was so deep that I could hear the exact moment his car pulled into the driveway. I didn't even have to look out the window. I would recognize that engine misfiring from miles away. My heart started pounding immediately. Daniel, my wife's son, was back after 6 years of not setting foot in this house. And I, alone here for 2 weeks while Caroline was on her annual spiritual retreat, was forced to face all the feelings I'd worked so hard to bury. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to get more stories like this. My name is Michael, I'm 42, and until 3 weeks ago, my life was perfectly normal. After taking early retirement from naval engineering, I found the perfect refuge in the solitude of Maine's coastline. I had a meticulously planned routine that kept me safe from the chaos outside. Caroline and I have been married for 5 years since she lost her husband in a sea accident. Our relationship was always more practical than passionate. She needed security, and I needed someone to keep me company sometimes. It was an unspoken arrangement that worked for both of us. If you've ever felt that nervous pit in your stomach when you know something is about to change your life completely, you'll understand exactly what I felt at that moment. The sound of the car door slamming echoed like a gunshot. I froze on the back porch, torn between hiding and facing the inevitable meeting. Why was he here? Caroline had mentioned that Daniel was supposedly in Europe working on his book. His visits were rare and always planned ahead, usually during holidays when his mom was around. Daniel and I had never been close. How could we be? He was 22 when I married his mother, already an adult with his own life, and our interactions were limited to tense Christmas dinners and occasional calls to his mom. But there was something more, something I never admitted out loud. The way my eyes would linger just a little too long when he entered the room, how my voice would change ever so slightly when we talked, that indescribable tension in the air that I secretly hoped no one else noticed. I heard footsteps on the front porch, then someone knocking at the door. The knock was too firm to be a salesperson and too hesitant to be a friend. I straightened my rumpled shirt, ran my hand through my graying hair at the temples, and slowly walked to the entrance. Every step seemed to bring me not only closer to Daniel, but also to a precipice I'd been avoiding for years. When I opened the door, time seemed to freeze for a moment. Daniel looked different, more mature than the 20-something boy I remembered. His face now had lines that hinted at experiences I knew nothing about, and his eyes, just like his mother's, studied me with a disconcerting intensity. "Michael," he said simply, a half-smile forming on his lips. "Surprised to see me?" "Daniel." My voice came out rougher than usual. "Your mom didn't say you'd be coming. She doesn't know." He adjusted the backpack on his shoulder. "Can I come in? The storm is coming faster than I expected." That's when I noticed the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. How had I missed that? I, who checked the sky every day like clockwork. "Of course," I replied, stepping aside. "Come in." The smell of his cologne filled the space as he passed by. Wood and spices with a hint of citrus underneath. So different from the floral perfume Caroline wore. Suddenly, the house felt smaller with him here. Daniel dropped his backpack on the living room floor and looked around as if he was getting reacquainted with the place. "Nothing's changed," he said, running his fingers over the bookshelf. "Still the same model ships, the same technical books. You're a creature of habit, aren't you?" "Stability has its value," I said, keeping a safe distance. "Want something to drink? Water? Coffee? Got something stronger?" His eyes met mine with an almost challenging gleam. "I think we both might need it." I poured 2 glasses of whiskey without asking any questions. There was a heavy silence between us, full of unasked questions. Daniel took his glass, and our fingers brushed briefly, an accidental touch that sent a jolt through my arm. "So," I began, sitting in the armchair across from the sofa where he settled. "What brings you here after all these years?" Daniel swirled the amber liquid in his glass before answering, his eyes fixed on the way it moved. "I'm tired of running," he finally said, looking up at me. "I needed to face some things I left behind." "Running from what?" That question hung between us like smoke. Outside, the first raindrops began to hit the windows, heralding the coming storm. "Do you really want to know, Michael?" His voice had a tone I'd never heard before, vulnerable yet defiant at the same time. "Because once I start talking, I don't know if I can stop." Something deep inside me told me to back away, to keep our conversation in safer territory. But I found myself nodding, as if some force beyond my control was guiding me. I want to know. Daniel smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. My editor thinks I'm in Italy researching my new book. My friends assume I'm on a creative retreat. No one knows I'm here. Why? Because what I'm after isn't something I can explain to them. He downed his drink in one gulp and leaned forward. I spent 6 years avoiding this house, avoiding you, making excuses not to show up at Christmas, planning visits when I knew I'd be traveling. The thunder that shook the house matched the impact of his words. My throat went dry, and the whiskey in my glass suddenly seemed nowhere near enough. I don't get it, I lied, even though a part of me was starting to suspect. You do get it. His eyes held mine, not giving an inch. There was always something between us, right from the start, something neither of us ever had the courage to name. The rain came down hard now, creating a curtain of water that isolated the house from the outside world. Inside, the air between us buzzed with electricity. Daniel, I'm married to your mom. The words slipped out automatically, a fragile shield against what was happening. And has that made any of you happy? He got up and walked to the window to watch the storm. Do you think I haven't noticed how you barely look each other in the eye? How you sleep in separate rooms when I'm here? How she still mentions my dad's name even after all these years? I had no answer for that. Our marriage had turned into a comfortable coexistence. No big fights, but no deep passion either. Caroline and I hardly ever argued, yet we never really celebrated life. We existed side by side like two ships anchored in the same harbor, never really touching. Daniel turned to me, his profile lit against the stormy sky outside. I came because I need to know if I'm going crazy, if I imagined it all. Those looks when I thought no one was watching. The way your voice changes when you talk to me. How you always find excuses to leave the room when we're alone for too long. My hands were shaking so much I had to set the glass down on the table. The storm was roaring outside, but nothing compared to the storm inside me. Daniel, this isn't, I started. Appropriate? Right? Normal? He stepped closer. You really think I don't know? You think I haven't spent sleepless nights hating myself for feeling what I feel? A flash of lightning lit up his face, revealing a vulnerability I'd never seen before. In that moment, he wasn't just my wife's son. He was simply a man standing in front of me, exposing his deepest truths. We can't, I began, but the words died in my throat when the lights flickered, and suddenly the house was plunged into darkness. My carefully built certainties started to crumble like a sandcastle before the tide. I'm going to get some candles, I murmured as I rose blindly. Wait. His voice came from the darkness, much closer than I expected. Don't run from this conversation. Not this time. I felt his hand find my arm in the dark, a tentative touch sending waves of warmth through my skin. I knew I should pull away, but I stayed still, like a castaway clinging to the last piece of driftwood in a raging sea. What do you want from me, Daniel? I asked in a whisper. The truth. Just that. In that darkness, I found a courage I never knew I had. Yes, I finally admitted. There was something from the very beginning. Something I fought so hard to ignore, to bury so deep that even I might have forgotten it. The relief in his breathing was almost audible. Then I'm not crazy. We both are, I replied. This could never... Why not? His voice came closer now, his warmth noticeable even without touching. Who are we protecting? A marriage that only exists on paper? Feelings neither of us chose? A new flash of lightning briefly lit the room, just enough to see his face inches from mine, his eyes a mix of fear and determination that mirrored exactly how I felt. I'm 42, I said into the darkness that followed. You're 28. I'm married to your mom. There are a million reasons this is wrong, and how many reasons make it right? His hand reached up, his fingers gently tracing the outline of my jaw. How many people find someone who understands them completely, who sees them for who they really are? The storm outside roared, but nothing compared to the turbulence inside me. Decades of self-deception and denial were threatening to collapse with a single touch. "We can't go back after this," I whispered, my last bit of resistance fading. "I don't want to go back," he replied. "I spent 6 years running. I'm tired of running." In the complete darkness of the room, with only the lightning giving brief glimpses of his face, I felt a freedom I'd never known. It was as if that night existed outside normal time, suspended between the real world and somewhere the rules didn't matter. The storm had created a bubble around us, isolating us from any consequences. "I'm going to light some candles," I whispered, moving away slightly. It wasn't just about being practical. I needed a few moments to breathe, to take in what was happening. "I'm coming with you," Daniel said, his calm voice contrasting with the turmoil inside me. We wandered through the dark house like explorers in unknown territory. I knew every inch of those walls, every piece of furniture, every creaking step. But with Daniel following my steps, everything felt new and dangerous. I found the candles in the kitchen drawer and lit them one by one, creating little islands of amber light that danced with the shadows on the walls. Daniel picked up one candle and held it so the light illuminated his face from below, making his features look almost otherworldly. "Better, isn't it?" he asked, though there was something in his tone that suggested he wasn't just talking about the light. "Yeah," I said, setting a few more candles on the kitchen counter. "Want something to eat? I'm not sure how long this power outage will last." "A sandwich would be great. I drove all day to get here," he said as he placed his candle on the table. I started making something simple: bread, cheese, ham. Grateful for the distraction. The rain against the windows created a hypnotic melody, punctuated now and then by distant thunder. "I remember the first time I saw you," Daniel said suddenly, sitting on one of the high stools at the counter. "It was at the hospital after my mom broke her ankle on that walk. You brought flowers, not roses, but those little wildflowers she always loved." I paused, the knife hovering over the bread. "You noticed that?" "I noticed everything about you," he admitted. "How you spoke little but observed a lot. How your hands were rough but your gestures gentle. How you kept everyone at arm's length, even me. But your eyes told a different story." That intimacy hit me like a wave. How many times had I secretly studied his face while he was distracted? How many details about him had I memorized that even Caroline, his own mother, didn't know? "I shouldn't have noticed those things," I replied, turning back to the sandwich. "And I shouldn't have noticed how your eyes change with the light, or that little habit you have of biting your lip when you're concentrating, or how your laugh sounds different when it's real versus polite." A silence fell between us, filled only by the sound of the storm outside. "But you did notice," he said quietly. "Just like I noticed." I pushed the plate with the sandwich toward him, not daring to look him in the eye. "That doesn't mean we have to act on it." Daniel picked up the sandwich but didn't eat it. "Do you know what my new book is about? Regret. People at the end of life realizing that their deepest pain isn't from what they did, but from all they never had the courage to do. There are good reasons for not doing certain things," I argued, even though my conviction was fading by the second. "Yeah, there are." He took a bite of the sandwich, chewing slowly before continuing. "But there are also reasons for not living just to please others, or for following rules that don't make sense to us." A particularly loud thunderclap shook the house, making the candles flicker. For a moment, I thought they were going to go out, leaving us in total darkness again. Part of me almost wished for that. It might be easier to say some truths when it's pitch black. "Caroline's back in 2 weeks," I said, as if that explained everything. "I know." He finished the sandwich and wiped his hands on a napkin. "I didn't come here to destroy your marriage or cause chaos. I came because I needed to know if what I felt was real or just a fantasy I built up." "Oh, and now that you know?" Daniel walked around the counter, closing the gap between us until there was barely a hand's width left. Under the flickering candlelight, his face took on an almost ethereal quality, like a Caravaggio painting with deep shadows and golden light. "Now I know it's more real than anything I've ever felt," he said, "and I think you know it too." I looked away, staring into the flame of the nearest candle. It was easier than facing the truth in his eyes. "I'm scared," I finally confessed, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Not about what others might think, but of myself, of how this could change who I am, of how I might never see myself the same way again. The man you pretend to be and the man you really are, they're not the same, Michael. His hand lightly touched my arm. Which one do you want to save? That question hung between us, too heavy for an immediate answer. Outside, the storm started to ease, the rain reducing to a steady drumming on the roof. Let's go to the living room, I suggested, grabbing 2 more candles. It's more comfortable there. We took our little lights into the larger space, forming an intimate circle on the sofa and nearby chairs. I sat at one end of the sofa, expecting Daniel to choose a chair and leave some distance between us. Instead, he sat at the other end of the same sofa, close enough to talk easily, but far enough to avoid forced contact. You know what's funny? He asked, watching the flame of his candle. I spent years building up stories in my head about how this moment would be, what I'd say, how you'd react. I imagined anger, denial, maybe even disgust, but I never expected to meet someone as scared as I am. I'm not scared, I protested automatically. Daniel laughed, a low, genuine sound that filled the room. Liar. And then, almost without thinking, I found myself laughing too, a nervous laugh that soon turned into something more genuine. The absurd truth of the situation hit me suddenly. 2 grown men, sitting on a sofa in a storm, admitting feelings they'd hidden for years, trembling like teenagers. All right, I admitted when our laughter died down. I'm completely terrified. Me too. He set his candle on the coffee table and leaned back on the sofa. I drove 500 kilometers almost non-stop to get here, and in the last 50 minutes, I almost turned back about 10 times. Why didn't you? He paused before answering. Because I realized I'd keep coming back to this moment in my thoughts for the rest of my life. I'd never stop asking, what if? I understood exactly what he meant. How many nights had I lain awake, trying not to think of him, only to be overwhelmed by all those maddening what-ifs? What if I'd met him sooner? What if things were different? What if I had the courage? What do you want to happen now, Daniel? I finally asked, facing the question hanging between us. He held my gaze for a long moment before answering. I want us to be honest, just this once. I want us to stop pretending. I'm not asking you to change your life or make promises. I just want that for tonight. There are no lies between us. The simplicity of his request disarmed me. It wasn't an impossible demand or an ultimatum. It was simply an invitation to embrace the truth, something I'd denied myself for so long that I'd nearly forgotten how it felt. I can do that, I replied, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. The ensuing silence was different from before, no longer tense or heavy, but comfortable, as if we'd reached an understanding. Daniel suddenly stood up. I'm going to grab another blanket. It's getting cold without the heat. I watched him walk to the closet in the hallway, his movements graceful even in the dim light. I knew the house too well for someone who rarely visited. When he came back, he carried 2 thick blankets. He handed one to me, and to my surprise, sat much closer this time, wrapping himself in the other blanket. Better to keep the warmth, he commented with a faint smile. I read somewhere that we lose most of our body heat through our heads and feet. That's actually a myth, I replied automatically. Heat loss depends on how much skin is exposed, not just specific parts. Always the engineer, he laughed, breaking the magic with science. Sorry, I murmured, feeling oddly embarrassed. No, it's one of the things I've always admired about you, he said, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. That precision, that attention to detail, that mind that's always calculating, measuring, evaluating. There was something in his tone that made me ask, does that ever bother you? Daniel tilted his head, as if considering the question. Sometimes I wonder what it'd be like to see the world through your eyes. Everything so organized, so logical. My mind is a constant chaos of images, ideas, and emotions. It's exhausting, and I wonder what it would be like to live with so much intensity, I confessed. You always seem to feel everything so deeply. I envy that. Our eyes met then, and something shifted between us. The conversation had brought us closer in a way that was both intellectual and deeply intimate. "Can I show you?" he whispered. Before I could even process what was happening, Daniel leaned in toward me. It was a slow, deliberate move, giving me all the time I would have needed to pull away. I didn't. His lips met mine with a surprising tenderness, a tentative, almost reverent touch as if he were testing both my reaction and the reality of the moment. The kiss lasted only a few seconds before he pulled away slightly, his eyes searching my face for any sign of regret or rejection. He found none. In that brief moment, it felt like a circuit had finally been completed, an electric current running through every nerve in my body. All the doubts, all the reasons not to do this, seemed distant and irrelevant compared to the intensity of that feeling. "That's what it's like to feel something strongly," he whispered. My hands moved almost on their own to his face, my fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I don't think I've really understood it yet," I said, surprised by my own boldness. "Maybe I need another demonstration." A slow smile spread across his face before he leaned in and kissed me again, this time without hesitation. My fingers tangled in his hair as I pulled him closer, years of repressed desire finally coming to the surface. The kiss deepened, shifting from something tentative to something as necessary as breathing. His arms wrapped around me, erasing any gap between us. I could feel his heart pounding against my chest, fast and strong like a bird's wings in flight. When we finally pulled apart, we were both out of breath. The candlelight caught the shine in his eyes and the flush on his cheeks. He looked both younger and at the same time infinitely wiser, as if he had just uncovered an ancient secret. "You have no idea," he murmured against my lips, "how long I've waited for this." "I think I do," I replied, my voice raspier than before. He moved back slightly, just enough so he could look me in the eyes. "This changes everything, doesn't it?" The question lingered between us, heavy with meaning. He was right. There was no going back now. Even if we stopped here, even if we never touched again, something fundamental had shifted, a truth that couldn't be undone. "Yeah," I admitted. "It changes everything." Instead of reacting with alarm, Daniel seemed to relax, as if he'd finally gotten the confirmation he'd been searching for. "I'm tired of living a half-life," he said, holding my hands, "of settling for crumbs of happiness, of pretending to be someone I'm not for someone else's comfort." His words hit me like they were pulled right out of my own head. How many times had I felt the same, but never dared to say it out loud? "So what happens now?" I asked, part of me still trying to figure out some logic, some plan for what to do next. Daniel smiled, that mix of tenderness and sadness softening his face. "Now we just stop overthinking." He got up and took my hand, and together, our shadows danced on the wall in the flickering candlelight. "Come with me," he said simply. I followed him through the living room, up the stairs to the second floor. Every step felt like a choice, each one taking me further away from the person I thought I was. But I didn't hesitate. There was a strange clarity in my mind, as if I were finally waking up from a long, confusing dream. My room, the one I used to share with Caroline when she was home, was the last place I wanted to be that night. As if reading my mind, Daniel led us to the guest room down the hall. The space was cold and rarely used, but tonight it felt perfect, neutral territory. Daniel put his candle on the bedside table, forming a small circle of golden light. Outside, the storm had dwindled down to a steady rain, a soft, almost musical background. "We can still stop," he said, his eyes serious as he watched me place my own candle next to his. "If you want, no hard feelings." I considered his offer for a moment, the last chance to return to my carefully ordered life. Then I took a step toward him and touched his face. "I don't want to stop," I said, surprised at the certainty in my voice. "For the first time in years, I know exactly what I want." The relief on his face was almost tangible. He held my hand against his cheek, turning to kiss my palm. Such a simple, deeply intimate gesture that made my heart skip a beat. "Then show me," he whispered. Our lips met again, this time without any hesitation. My hands found the edge of his shirt, sliding under the fabric to feel the warmth of his skin on his back. He shuddered under my touch, a slight sound of pleasure escaping his lips. The buttons on my shirt gave way easily under his fingers, as if he'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in his head. Maybe he had, just as I'd imagined in moments of weakness, what it would be like to feel his skin against mine. Reality turned out to be even better than any fantasy. When our shirts fell to the ground and our bare torsos met, the feeling was almost overwhelming. His skin was warm, smooth, and full of life under my hands. Every small movement, every sigh, every shiver was heightened in the quiet of that room. "You're exactly as I imagined," Daniel murmured against my neck, his lips tracing a path of kisses that made me close my eyes. "You imagined that a lot?" I asked, my hands exploring his shoulders and the curve of his back. More than I'd admit, without sounding obsessed. He laughed softly, the sound vibrating against my skin. I guided him slowly toward the bed, our bodies moving together as if we'd done this 1,000 times. When he lay down and pulled me close, the candlelight created dancing shadows on his torso, turning the moment almost mythical. Time seemed to slow down as we explored each other with our hands, lips, and whole bodies. There was no rush, just discovery. We found places that drew out soft sighs, discovered rhythms that made our bodies burn, whispered words that made every sensation more intense. His hands ran over my chest, down to the button on my pants. There was a pause, a silent look in his eyes, asking permission. I answered with a deep kiss as my fingers joined his in removing the last barriers between us. In the half-light of that room, our bodies finally came together with no obstacles. It was like diving into deep, unknown water, frightening and freeing all at once. Every touch was a revelation, every movement a confession. "Michael," he whispered my name like a prayer. His eyes locked on mine as our hands and bodies moved as one. The intimacy of that moment went far beyond the physical. It was as if something essential inside me had finally found its match, a key that fits a lock after years of searching. Our bodies fit together so naturally, as if they were made for each other. The pleasure built up between us like a wave, slowly rising until it was almost too much. We kept our eyes open, witnessing the vulnerability in one another during that complete surrender. When we finally climaxed, it was almost simultaneous, a moment of perfect harmony that went beyond just the physical. Afterward, lying side by side in the breathless aftermath, the quiet between us was comforting. The sound of the rain had turned to a gentle drip, as if the storm itself were settling down along with us. Daniel traced lazy patterns on my chest with his fingers, a soft smile on his lips. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. I searched inside myself for any trace of guilt or remorse. Surprisingly, there was none, only a calm I hadn't felt in years. "No," I answered honestly. "I probably should, I know, but I'm not." He smiled wider and leaned in to kiss my shoulder. Me neither. The candles were nearly spent, their flames dimming. Soon we would be plunged into total darkness again. But somehow that didn't worry me. It felt as if I'd finally found my path after years of wandering. "What happens tomorrow?" I asked, turning to look at him more closely. Daniel shifted so that our heads shared the same pillow. "Tomorrow we wake up together. We have breakfast, talk, and then—" "And then?" I prompted. His eyes met mine, serious despite the smile at his lips. "Then we decide what we want this to be. No pressure, no impossible expectations. Just two people figuring out if what they found is worth fighting for." The simplicity of his answer touched me deeply. There were no grand promises or dramatic declarations, just honesty and the possibility of choices. "I can live with that," I said, pulling him even closer. As the candles finally burned out and the room sank into darkness, I felt a strange peace wrap around me. I didn't know what dawn would bring, what the consequences of our actions would be, or how we'd face the world beyond those walls. But for the first time in a long time, the future didn't seem like a burden. It felt like an adventure. With Daniel's soft breathing against my chest, I closed my eyes and simply existed in that moment, with no regrets for the past and no anxiety for the future. just the present, in all its imperfect perfection. I woke up feeling a warm body next to mine. For a brief, disorienting moment, I imagined that Caroline had come back early from her trip. Then the reality of last night crashed over me. Daniel, the storm, our mutual confession, and everything that followed. I slowly opened my eyes. Morning light seeped in through the half-drawn curtains, bathing the room in a golden glow. Daniel wasn't by my side anymore, but the pillow still held the imprint of his head, and the blankets were rumpled on his side of the bed. The smell of fresh coffee hung in the air, mixed with something else, maybe toasted bread. I sat up, trying to sort out my thoughts. There was no regret, which surprised me, but there was a new sense of urgency, an acute awareness that big decisions lay ahead. The world outside that room hadn't stopped for us overnight. I got dressed quickly and headed downstairs, following the inviting smell of coffee. I found Daniel in the kitchen, wearing nothing but pajama pants, stirring something in a frying pan. He glanced over his shoulder when he heard my steps, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Good morning," he said, turning back to the pan. "Hope you like scrambled eggs. I found some bacon in the freezer, but it was still frozen." There was something in the everyday sight of Daniel making breakfast in my kitchen, as if it were totally normal, that struck me unexpectedly. It wasn't just the physical act of last night that had changed everything. It was this, the ease with which we slid into each other's lives. "Coffee?" he offered, pointing toward the coffee maker. "Please," I replied, walking over to grab a cup from the cabinet. Our bodies brushed briefly in the narrow space between the counter and the stove. That casual touch sent a shiver up my spine, just a reminder of the intimacy we shared. "The power came back around 4 in the morning, Daniel said as he divided the eggs onto 2 plates. I woke to the sound of the heater turning on. "You should have woken me," I said, sitting down at the kitchen table. Daniel set a plate in front of me and sat on the stool opposite me. "You were sleeping so deeply. I didn't have the nerve." We ate in silence for a few minutes, exchanging occasional looks over our coffee cups. There was a strange mix of comfort and tension in the air. The comfort of two people who'd crossed a huge line, and the tension of what it all might mean. "So," Daniel finally broke the silence, "did you sleep well?" The triviality of the question, in light of everything that happened between us, made me laugh. "Is that what we're doing now? Small talk?" He smiled, that crooked smile which still set my heart racing even when I tried to ignore it. "I'm trying to be civilized here, give you some space to process." "I'm processing," I admitted, pushing the eggs around on my plate. "I just don't know exactly where this leaves us." Daniel set his fork down and looked at me with an intensity that reminded me of last night. "Where do you want this to go, Michael?" The question hung heavy between us. It would have been easy to back out now, to say this was a mistake or a momentary lapse during the storm. A part of me, the practical, rational side that's guided my entire life, told me that would be the sensible answer. But it wasn't the truth. "I don't want this to end," I finally said, the words bursting out before I could stop them. "I know I should say something else, that there are 1,000 reasons why this is so complicated. But the truth is simple. I don't want it to end." The relief on Daniel's face was almost tangible. "I don't either. But Caroline..." "I know." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. "My mom doesn't deserve to be hurt. None of us want that." "Then what do we do?" Daniel took a deep breath and stepped back slightly. "It depends on what we're willing to risk, on what we want for our lives." The reality of our situation was starting to settle in. This wasn't just about feelings or desires. It was about making choices with real consequences. "I can't just walk away from my marriage without an honest conversation," I said. "I owe that to her, at the very least." Daniel nodded slowly. "I respect that. She's my mom, after all. As messed up as our situation is, I don't want to be the one causing her pain." A thoughtful silence settled between us as we finished our breakfast. The morning light filled the kitchen completely now, banishing the last shadows of last night. With that clarity came a starker sense of reality. We were no longer protected by the storm, by the darkness, by the magic of that moment. "I have to be back in New York in 2 days," Daniel said at last, getting up to take the dishes to the sink. I have a meeting with my editor, I can't delay. I felt a pang in my chest hearing that. It was ridiculously premature, given that we had spent only one night together. Yet the thought of him leaving already left a hollow spot inside me. And then? I asked, joining him at the sink. He began washing the dishes, a simple domestic act that struck me with its normalcy. After that, I think we need some time apart. You need to figure out what you want to do about your marriage, with or without me. And I need to be sure that what I feel isn't just the thrill of a long-held fantasy coming true. His honesty was both painful and strangely comforting. There were no empty promises or pressure to decide immediately, just the raw truth of our situation. That sounds sensible, I agreed, even though part of me wanted to protest, to demand some certainty. Daniel smiled as he rinsed the last dish. Sensible. We've always been good at that, haven't we? Holding back what we really want in the name of being sensible. There was a hint of bitterness in his tone I couldn't ignore. But it's different now, I said, touching his wet arm. No, I think we're finally being honest. With ourselves, with each other, and with what we truly want. Looking into his eyes, filled with hope and uncertainty, I made a decision. Not about the whole future or grand promises, just about that moment, that day. You've got 2 days before you leave, I said, holding his face in my hands. Let's make them count. His smile lit up the room more than the morning sun. What do you suggest, Mr. Harrison? I suggest we really explore this. No pressure, no impossible expectations. Just 2 days to figure out what we have, to see what we can be for each other beyond just a fantasy. The kiss that followed was different from last night's, less frantic, less desperate, yet just as deep. It wasn't just about desire, it was a promise. Not a guarantee of a happy ending, but a promise to try honestly. The next 2 days passed like a dream. We walked along the empty beach, talking about everything and nothing. We cooked together, rediscovering the pleasure of creating something side by side. We watched an old movie curled up on the sofa, chatting and laughing like we'd done it 100 times before. And at night, we rediscovered each other with the same passion as before, but now with the comfort of growing familiarity. Two lovers slowly learning each other's ways. At no point did we mention Caroline directly, but her presence hovered at the edge of our thoughts, in the photos hanging in the house, in the little objects that were unmistakably hers, in the reality waiting beyond those 2 days. On the morning Daniel was leaving, I watched him pack his bag, each movement sending a bittersweet pain through me. I didn't want him to go, but I knew we needed that time apart, to think, to decide, to figure things out. I'll talk to her when I get back, Daniel said as we loaded his bag into the car. I don't know exactly what I'll say, but I'll be honest. At least, as honest as I can be. He leaned against the car's side. I can wait for you, Michael. I want you to know that. But I'll understand if you decide your place is elsewhere. The generosity in that offer touched me deeply. There were no ultimatums, no manipulation, just the understanding that some decisions must be made on your own. I'll call you, I promised, gently caressing his face one last time. Once I've spoken with her, once I know what I can do, I'll call. He held my hand against his cheek, his eyes saying what words couldn't. I'll be waiting. The farewell kiss was brief and almost chaste, a stark contrast to the intimacy we'd shared. When he got into the car and started the engine, I felt a tight pain in my chest, almost physical in its intensity. Daniel, I called, leaning out the window. No matter what happens, I have no regrets. Not for a second. His smile, that very smile that had brightened my mornings these past days, appeared one last time. Neither do I, Michael. Not for a second. I watched as his car slowed into the distance and then disappeared around a curve. I went back inside to a house that now felt strangely empty, carrying the weight of decisions yet to be made along with the lightness of finally facing the truth. The full stories, unfiltered and with all the details you can imagine, are available now. Check the link in the description right away. Caroline would be back in 12 days. 12 days to decide what kind of life I wanted to live. what kind of person I wanted to be. 12 days to find the courage to do what I'd never thought possible. When I closed the door behind me, I noticed something on the entry console, a small folded piece of paper with my name written in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting. I opened it with trembling fingers and found only one line. "Some storms don't come to destroy, they come to clear the way." I kept that note in my pocket, close to my heart, and began planning what I would say when my wife returned. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the future, only quietly sure that no matter what happened, I was finally living honestly. If you've ever felt like you were living a life that wasn't really yours, leave a like and share your experience in the comments. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply being who you really are, no matter how scary it may be.